All right, so good afternoon. This is the follow-up to the Accredited Lab Deliberative Dialogue session that was held on February 11th of this year. We got through question 5 that you see on your screen right now, but because these last 3 questions were really important and we wanted to make sure that we answered them in a meaningful way, we're reconvening today for an hour and a half to address these questions. So on the call today, we have Amber Wise, James Burns, Jeff Dowdy, and Tanya, Sasaki. And when we did the deliberative dialogue before, I think I called on people, to make sure that everybody got enough airtime. Since this is a little less formal, why don't I will read the first question, and then you can just begin discussion amongst yourselves. I don't want to restrain the conversation. It's just really hope that it can be spontaneous and you can each sort of follow off of each other, ask each other questions, kind of build out the conversation a little bit. And I'll jump in here and there, but really this is your conversation. So, questions before we get started? Okay, sorry, you guys are over here on the screen, and I know my camera is right here. Sorry. All right, so with that, let's go ahead and jump in with, well, before we start, any reflections on how the deliberative dialogue went for your panel on the 11th? Anything you want to share before we start this conversation? Not really? Went okay?
I mean, I thought it went fine.
Good.
Had pretty good attendance, which isn't unexpected given the hot button topics that we're on. But yeah, I think it's good to have a venue where, as labs, we can talk about this stuff and not be drowned out by licensees where there's just they outnumber us, so to speak. So it's good to have our own venue where we can voice our concerns.
Great, thanks, Jeff. Anyone else? All right, well, with that, we'll just go ahead and get started with question 6. All right, and that question was, what can we do as I-502 Labs to increase public regulator confidence in our results? Amber, you're smiling.
I mean, I have some thoughts. I didn't want to just jump in immediately, but I think there's a number of things, and it's a little hard. There's obviously not one easy answer. If it was one easy answer, we wouldn't be in this position we're in right now. I think having the ability to confirm our results at an independent third-party lab. I mean, I know that's what we are, independent third-party labs, but potentially a state-run lab confirming some value that we have, the individual labs have also taken, right? And there's a number of different forms that could take. Being able to, compare values between labs, and this is partly why we participate in proficiency tests. Those are good, relatively good methods for ensuring that, a sample that comes through our lab will be tested correctly. However, they're not blind, right? We know what proficiency tests are running. We know what that sample is. And so it's not a true blind comparison. So I don't know. I think there's a handful of ways that some sort of confirmation could be done, or having some requirement that a certain amount of tests get run through another lab that is partly funded by the state to some degree. I mean, I just saw a study last week that it's a $1.3 million of cannabis tax money go to the Department of Ag for testing cannabis. So there's a pot of money there that could potentially be utilized, you know, for confirmation of lab ability. I'm going to leave it there and see if anybody else has a comment and see if there's anything else I want to add.
Okay. Thank you.
I mean, I'll just jump in and say that, you know, I mean, I agree with Amber that having some sort of a, you know, outside, another lab kind of, you know, not checking out every result, but just having comparisons at times. I think one way, aside from having like a Department of Ag or somebody do it, if we were, as labs, allowed to collaborate on samples, I think would also be helpful. So we could sort of, which we've been denied directly more than once. But, you know, I think having that ability would help us, you know, have more confidence in our methods, and we could kind of have, you know, probably working as together, we could improve, you know, how we do things. But I'm not sure how much that would help public confidence, though. You know, I'll make one little comment here, and then I'll yield the floor here. But to me, the way I see it, the way I think the public sees us is that we're just one lab, and this one lab tests every bit of cannabis in the United States. And so if a lab in California gets closed down for something, it's us too. Right? We're all guilty, and it just gets spread. So that's one problem. We're a black box, and I kind of also see that, like, just my informal conversations with friends and acquaintances, they have most of them have no idea about lab testing at all, right? They don't know what we test, why we test it, and all they know is potency, right? Because that's the only thing that shows up on the label. They don't know all about the other stuff. And so really, I think, you know, I think there's a lack of understanding on the public side of what we do, and all they see are the, and there's never any follow-up, right? It's like, oh, this lab got shut down. Well, what happened? What was really found? Like, nobody ever pays attention to that. We may never even know. So anyway, I think that's good. So I'll stop there for now.
Yeah, and so I think what I'll add is some of the steps that are being made. I think some oversight into moving the accreditation and oversight of laboratories out of the LCB to Department of Ecology, who has the experience, I think is a really good first step. And then all the groups are giving best practices and discussing what some of the best practices for these methods are. And as labs, we could probably have better communication amongst ourselves to go back to what was James that said, and Amber, to work with each other. And then ISO, like I know our lab voluntarily got ISO accreditation because that's just another quality standard, especially because, like I said, we know the current lab accreditation is lacking. And so to give some credibility to our results and quality, we voluntarily went into that program. And I know some other labs have as well. And finally, just to reiterate, to educate the public. I've worked in other industries, and you know the lab is scary science black box. And so to educate them and how difficult it is, because just because the labs have different results, it's not necessarily nefarious. It's some complex testing, and the product isn't necessarily homogeneous all the time. So that's kind of my 2 cents on that topic.
So to jump right on that heterogeneity side and kind of what Amber's talking about with confirmation, in order to accomplish any kind of confirmation of samples, in my opinion, we would need some kind of third-party sampling in order to ensure that we're getting similar samples. I mean, and that doesn't get rid of the concept of just natural variation within the plant, which is there. So there's that, and then I actually have a prepared statement from all of this, and I'm sorry, Kathy, I'm not pulling any punches on this one.
It's okay.
So what can we do as I-502 labs to increase public confidence in our results? As labs, comparatively not much. Follow the regulations, don't cut corners, run your QA samples, do your validations, be honest, and don't succumb to the economic pressures of inflating cannabinoid concentrations. Have those difficult conversations with our customers when problems such as failures or adulterations come up. A lot of this only works if we're all doing it, though. It's cliche, but we're only as strong as our weakest link. One other thing that I can think of that could increase confidence would be to publish papers in peer-reviewed journals. I'm as guilty as anyone of not publishing some pretty good data that we've taken, but backing up our statements with cold, hard science, I think, is important. It's hard to justify changes to a regulatory environment that impacts small businesses in such a drastic way, even potentially putting small farmers out of business without backing it up with science. I think a cannabis commission could also be helpful in that, though it would need pretty broad support from the farmers who would actually pay for it. That said, I think that much of the lack of confidence comes from frustration with the system itself. I don't mean to pick on the folks who regulate me, but the traceability system is a mess and will continue to be a mess for the foreseen future. We still aren't requiring testing for pesticides, which will continue to alienate many consumers, as evidenced by the strong support for home grow that is going on right now. Not to mention the outrage coming from the medical community. We need better science on what is an appropriate level of biological testing or heavy metals testing. Enforcement at the lab level is lacking, and the regulators themselves admit that they don't have the expertise to police the labs. I would argue that obtaining that expertise is an important step in regaining consumer confidence. That's my prepared little statement there.
Thank you. So follow up on that to each other, feedback to each other.
You know, I like the idea of, you know, having, I mean, I like the idea of publishing. I think that's a great idea. One of the issues, though, is that, you know, we're talking about, I think we've all sort of expressed, I'm not going to put words in anybody's mouth, but I think previously we've sort of expressed a lack of confidence in being able to verify the QA samples. I'll be gentle that way. And so if you have suspicion that your data isn't good to start with, it's kind of hard to make overall conclusions about anything. So that's one problem, right? So we can certainly generate our own data with more controlled sets, but you know, looking at the actual traceability data, I find it not very useful to make any broad conclusions. But I think, but just kind of what Jeff was saying, you know, spinning off of Jeff a little bit, I think it would be great if the labs could actually get together, you know, in a sort of semi-formal way, meetings, to kind of just discuss issues together and maybe collaboratively put papers out, right? Because it would be way better if there was more than one lab on there. And kind of get together, and I think that would be extremely helpful. Another thing too is somehow we got to get this potency to stop being so important. It is another thing, because that's really what most people are talking about. I know pesticides are going to become the next thing, especially as soon as a farm loses $1 million in crop. But you know, I think trying to get this just de-emphasizing potency somehow, because that's what leads to bad QA sampling for the most part. So anyway, I'll see what I have.
Yeah, I guess I'd just like to echo what Tanya and everyone has been saying. Essentially, is consumer education around a number of these issues, de-emphasizing potency, the complicated and, you know, not straightforward nature of testing itself, and also the task force's work in transitioning the accreditation to Department of Ecology, I hope will also help restore some credibility to the process in general. But again, there's a couple fundamental things that are outside our purview there, which is sampling methods and traceability that are, you know, kind of crucial to all of these conversations. So those will, you know, need to be straightened out, or will continue to be in this realm for, I think, quite a while.
Yeah, and I kind of want to touch base on that potency again, because it is such a big thing. And I know Everyone says, oh, it's so much stronger than it was, 30 years ago. My background in toxicology, they've done some studies where they show that, yeah, it is more potent or higher THC content, but people tend to, kind of self-titrate so that the levels in blood, for people, it's about the same. And I kind of liken that to, do you always go out and buy Bacardi 151 or Everclear? It's not all about the alcohol content. And, most people aren't, drinking or consuming cannabis to just get completely smashed, right? You want to get into a nice, relaxing, happy place, and then you just sit back and relax. So, there's so many other factors that come into play for that experience. So again, that just goes back to public education and messaging, not just from us, but really from producer processors. And then to kind of end my commentary on a positive note, I think Jeff brought up a lot of issues that are current issues, whether it's pesticide testing, the lack of the regulators don't have the background or experience. I think the good thing about that is that's all changing. It's all in the works, and a lot of it's legislative, so it doesn't happen overnight. But pesticide and heavy metal testing is coming down the road as mandatory, and then everything going with ecology and the task force, I think, addresses most of the issues that Jeff brought up.
Thank you for that.
Just
go ahead,
to tack on to what Tanya is talking about there, I tend to agree for the most part, but the enforcement side of things is completely out of the scope of the Cannabis Science Task Force. And I feel like that's such a critical component of what we're doing here. We can come up with all the regulations in the world, and if somebody decides not to follow them, they don't matter. And it's really easy to not follow them if you want to, and to just cover your tracks. So having, in the past, when we were having private meetings at the LCB level, where before you guys hired Nick, my recommendation was to hire a PhD chemist. And I still would reiterate that recommendation, because I don't think a bachelor's level chemist has the experience necessary to really do the type of auditing that you need. Similarly, on the traceability argument, if you had a working traceability system, and you may have better access to the data than I do, and you could potentially do this now, but you can look at statistical trends, and you don't use that to shut a lab down, but you use that to guide deeper delves into a lab's data. So you see something statistically weird, and that generates some red flags in the traceability system, and then you use that to start an audit of some like background investigation type of a thing, where we don't even know you're looking at us. Also, like Amber said earlier, having blind PTs, I think, and I don't know how the heck you do that, right? But ideally, you give the biggest producer processor in the state our PT, and they bring it to us in the guise of their lab shopping. Again, I don't know how you get them to not tell their preferred lab that, hey, this is your PT, and how you make it actually blind for everybody. But when we know that you're looking at us for a PT, we know it's a PT. It's you're giving us the test at that point. So it's a lot easier to take your time with that sample, make sure that everything's correct. Whereas if Northwest Cannabis Solutions is handing you a sample saying, hey, I'm just testing you out. Where are you guys at potency wise? It's a little bit, there's more pressure then, right? Because now I can have 2,000 samples in my door in a month if I do well on this sample, right? Like there's a lot more pressure on that. And so if you're incorporating that pressure in then with your PT, it's a different conversation.
Thank you. I did want to follow up on one thing that kind of sparked my interest, and that was the idea of labs collaborating. And I think, Jim, you said that, and Jeff, you said that. I don't know if I think you might have alluded to that, Amber and Tanya. Has that ever been a consideration for the accredited labs in Washington to sort of come together in the way that some of the other, like I think about all the other sort of associations, right, in other fields. Has that been a consideration for, it sounds like there might be interest. I don't know. I just wanted to follow up on that really quickly.
Yeah, I'll
Yeah.
dive in on that. Oh, go ahead, Amber.
Why don't you start, Jeff, and I'll follow.
I mean, I think Amber and I have actually talked about this offline at one point. Following up with the variation study that I did on cannabinoids, I'd love to see somebody who's accredited in pesticides be able to jump in and do something along those lines with heavy metals, pesticides, those other analytes that, I'm just not accredited for yet. In terms of being able to help, since I'm not accredited there, it'd be a little bit tough. We're working on it, and we'll get there here soon. And if nobody else does it, that starts that work, then I'm probably going to do it at that point. That was kind of my starting point there for the conversation.
Yeah, and I guess we actually, Medicine Creek Analytics, this was, gosh, 2 years ago now, maybe, not quite 2 years ago. Tanya, I don't even remember if you were at Confidence at this point, but Medicine Creek Analytics, Confidence Analytics, and Trace Analytics worked together. It was a bit of a secret project. We all signed an NDA, but we did send around pesticide samples to compare. And I hope I don't get in trouble for saying this. I mean, we never really, like, I don't know, publish is the right word. We never advertised the outcome of that summary. And I think part of the reason that was, it's really hard to get even 3 labs together to organize this. It's conference calls, it's sending samples, it's running the data, it's compiling the data, it's then talking to another conference call to like compare the data. It sounds simple, and it is relatively, but we're all incredibly busy. And so, having a facilitator for that, I think would really go a long way. Because I think there is interest in that to some degree. And, to summarize our results, we each had 2 samples we sent around to the other 2 labs of concentrates that we knew, or flour that that our lab had tested positive for some pesticide. And we didn't say what levels. We just said, we sent these couple samples around, and all just put our data into a spreadsheet and looked. And in if I'm remembering the results correctly, we all agreed on things that were going to fail fast if we're talking about action limits. And there was agreement across all 3 labs. And certainly Trace Analytics is no longer around, but there have been attempts to do this to some degree in the past. And we sort of, all 3 of us, convinced ourselves that we were doing a pretty decent job. There was some sharing of method, specifics. That was partly why we did NDAs, and partly why we didn't really talk really openly about this project, because people are sensitive about methods and things, and getting all of that out there. But I think a long story short is, we've attempted a little bit of that in the past. It's time consuming and complicated to get everybody on board. So having someone to facilitate that, I think, would make it much easier. Yeah.
Yeah, I also think, I think collaborating on samples is one thing, which is great, right? I mean, I think that's just could certainly be a part of it, but even just being able to get together just to discuss things, right? Just like ideas, like that, not necessarily sharing samples and data, but like, this is what I'm seeing. I got this weird lotion in, I have no idea what the heck's in it, and or whatever, or just these different issues. And then also just so we can sort of figure out, because I'm sure we're all seeing we're probably seeing a lot of the same issues from a different angle, and it would be great to have that opportunity. As far as like in the past, I mean, we've been around for, I guess pre-certification, I've been with Freeline for about 3 years. And, when I first started, I reached out to several other labs to try to get some dialogue going, and basically I got crickets. So, I would certainly, I'm very interested in it. I don't see how science works without collaboration. It certainly goes better. I think having some sort of maybe semi-formal or informal, meeting I think it needs to be facilitated by not another lab though. Like somebody else needs to start it. I don't think, we all should be equal in it, but we need somebody to kind of be the seed, I think.
And that's fair. I think, the LCB hosts those like quarterly lab meetings, I think it is. Sometimes I'm invited to those, sometimes I'm not. Mostly,
Yeah.
but yeah, and that would be, but it sounds like just with workload right now, and I've understood that for some time, that labs are just incredibly busy, and trying to put something like that together sort of organically between the labs can be a challenge at best. Yeah. Well, thanks. That was great kickoff to this discussion.
Can I got one more thing to add to
Oh, of
Jay's
course,
point.
yeah. Go ahead, yeah.
I think depending on what the steering committee ends up deciding on prescriptive versus performance-based criteria for methods, I could see the opportunity for collaboration to be a lot stronger in the future. If we're all required to use the same method, then it's a lot easier for us to then talk about that method. Whereas while we're all kind of going our own different directions and we're competing based off of our methods, it's a lot harder to have those conversations. It's a lot, you're afraid you're going to give up your competitive edge, so to speak, by talking with your competitors. Whereas it sounds like we're going that prescriptive method route. So I could see that happening.
All right, anything else before we move on to question 7? Last words or thoughts? We can always come back and supplement that if we want to, if you guys feel like you have another thought that comes to you. All right, so I know question 7 is a complicated question, and I'm glad we've got an hour. So let's go ahead and open it up, and that is, how in your mind do we find a compromise between rigorous science and affordable science? How do we require pesticides and heavy metals without killing off small farmers?
So I can jump in and kind of be the conversation starter here. I've again got a prepared statement that I'll read off. Yeah, and I've talked about this in the past, and well, I'll just read it. This is a non-starter answer, I know, but it's the only answer I can think of. Taxes need to come down in some way. We built this system without considering pesticide and heavy metal testing, and the tax rate is reflective of that. If we're going to incorporate a new testing regime that is both time-consuming and expensive, something is going to have to give. If saving small farmers who are already struggling under the current regime is important, something has to change. As labs, we're already very inexpensive, considering the steps we need to take to ensure quality data. That's only going to get more expensive, by the way. We as an industry are already cutting corners or losing business to those who are. It is right now as cheap and fast as it ever will be. With the transition of accreditation to ecology, samples are going to take longer and cost us more to run. This is not conjecture. If we're going to require third-party sampling, costs are going to go up. We can't make lot sizes larger without risking increasing the variation of the results, so where do we go? Either the small farmers are going to go out of business, or we're going to have to lower the taxes somehow, in my opinion. One alternative to lowering the excise tax would be to create a line item tax at retail. And I've talked about this in the past. That goes to subsidize testing that is related to public health and safety. So mycotoxins, microbiology, pesticides, heavy metals, those types of tests. Anything that would be like cannabinoids, terpenes, that's more marketing related. So that would still be left to the farmer themselves or the processor. So the idea here is that this would be outlined on the receipt that an end user receives with purchase, saying something to the effect of, you've paid this much for pesticide and biological testing and heavy metals, listed out. I know that this would seriously complicate things for the LCB, but how else do we have our cake and eat it too? The lab costs are pretty fixed. We have to buy standards, chemicals, equipment. We have a specific amount of quality steps we have to take per batch of samples, and that is only going to increase in the future. We can't exactly charge less than we pay to run each sample, and our prices are going to go up with increased rigor. So again, I don't see any other choice but the taxes, and I know that that's just not going to happen. So I'm not sure how we fix this without putting farmers out of business.
Thanks, Jeff. Others?
I kind of have to reiterate a lot of what Jeff said, and there's a rigorous science and affordable science don't usually go together in the same sentence. So it's not necessarily a compromise that a lot of good scientists are willing to make. Jeff mentioned that testing is as cheap as it's ever been. I don't know how we could possibly get any more efficient or cheaper. Good science costs a lot of money. I mean, just the argon alone that I run for metals testing is $40,000 a year. And that, that's just one tiny cost amongst many. And all of the other labs here can attest to all the other random, very high costs that are completely hidden from, the sticker price of an analytical test. It's our job to bake that into our cost, right? And so, looking at pricing for compliance testing in other states, it's often 2 to 3 times as expensive for the same test that we do here. Same science, same instruments. Not like things cost, that much more in California for the basic, analytical reagents that we require. It's all from the same suppliers, more or less. So I do think it's a bit of a conundrum, and there does have to be some of that cost has to be transferred on to the end user. I've had friends from out of state move here and say they're shocked at how cheap cannabis is at the stores. So, I think, and if you look at other states that have more expensive and more rigorous compliance testing, there are business models that are profitable. So it can occur. And I don't know enough about, the rules of excise taxes and economic pressures to have a better suggestion there. But I guess from the scientist's point of view, there's not a lot we can do to make it any cheaper. And it's only going to get more expensive as the rigor is increased and the number of QC injections and things we do are increased. It's just going to have to.
Thanks.
Yeah, I think I'm going to echo a lot of what both Amber and Jeff said, is that already the price for testing in Washington is some of the lowest in the country. When I first got into space, I was actually pretty surprised at the low prices for testing, knowing from other industries what it costs to run a lab. So definitely that needs to be addressed, and how do we do that? Some it could be just going to end product testing, like maybe not everything for every step needs to be tested, because really at the end of the day, it's the end product that gets to the consumer. Now, if someone wanted to, the producer processor wanted to test any intermediates for whatever it might be, just as part of their process, that's totally fine. But for compliance testing, maybe going back to end product would help save producer processors money.
Yeah, no, I'll just throw in there that I totally agree with what I've heard so far. I will kind of, when I first read this question, I basically just had that sort of answers we just heard, and I still have those answers. I'm not sure they're answers, but statements. But when you sort of read this question, and it's kind of a philosophical can of worms, and really, I mean, the statement that more rigor costs more, it's kind of true. I mean, I think the relationship isn't linear. It's correlated. I mean, there are plenty of labs out there that do extremely rigorous science on shoestring budgets. So it's not like you have to spend tons of money to do rigorous science. Thing is, with the kind of testing we're doing, like especially if we're talking about adding pesticides and heavy metals, that is expensive science, right? Even if you don't do it with rigor, it's expensive, right? It's just that's kind of the point. I just kind of make that point on the slide. I think. And definitely, I mean, we are just way cheaper. I mean, for sure. I mean, I've looked into it too, and what you can find. And I think really, the reality of it is that cost really, I mean, taxes are an issue for sure. But I mean, there's no reason that cost can't be transferred on to the end user. Like say the prices at the store are low, like very low. It's like 1980s parking lot price still out there, and it's crazy. And so it's like cannabis is immune from inflation, and so I think that there's definitely room in the market there. But, you got to get the whole price up to cover that cost. And it's so I really think it comes down to I don't think we can sample any less, like Jeff was saying, like you mentioned. We can't go to 10-pound lots. I don't think that's a solution. So I really think it's just, and again, I think we're just gonna have to be higher prices.
Okay.
So to add on to this, just to be a little bit more specific here, currently for cannabinoids, it takes me about 10 minutes to run a sample. That's not including any of the quality assurance samples that I have to add into each batch. But for an individual sample, it takes about 10 minutes. If we're going to be following what the current recommendation from the steering committee is, we're looking at 25-minute run times. So I go from being able to run 6 samples per hour per machine to 2.5, 2 1/3 samples per hour. And that, again, that's not including the 5 samples that I have to run for every 20 actual samples for the quality assurance steps. That's not including the calibration samples that I have to run every day. So, I mean, just right there with one of our more inexpensive tests that we have to run, costs are going to go up if we go to this ecology model that we're pretty gung-ho about, right? I can't speak as much to the pesticides side of things. Maybe Amber or Tanya can, but just for cannabinoids, that's a huge increase in costs that we're looking at. And Jay's right in that in the end, somehow we've got to pass this on to the end user, because the farms can't absorb it, the retailers don't want to absorb it. But then we also run into the idea that the more expensive at retail that the product is, the more the black market is going to become a part of our world, right? The cheaper it is to go out and buy it from your buddy Rick, the less likely you are to go and buy it from the retail shop. So I feel like that there's kind of balancing forces at play here economically in that demand curve, so to speak.
There's a giant squirrel in the front yard. I apologize.
I'm fortunate that the UPS guy hasn't showed up and my dog goes crazy while I'm talking.
I have to share that happened with the processor producer group, and he had multiple boxes, and my dogs just lost their minds. It just, oh well. Thankfully, this is just someone walking their dog, so. Okay. Anybody else? Because I have kind of a follow-up question that might be a little bit controversial.
Yeah, and I think the other thing is there a way, and this is kind of just brainstorming off talk about that, you could be more selective about the test, maybe increase the lot sizes for some tests, like maybe residual solvents or something where the homogeneity is, or the sample is more homogeneous, but then for potency or cannabinoids, keep the lot size small. If we did something like that, then maybe it could help still get the representative data for each batch of product or each lot, but be more selective and increase lot sizes for certain tests.
Yeah, and that was one of the two questions I wanted to follow up with, and that is, in rethinking what the quality control rules might look like into the future. And I've asked our examiners unit, I've asked, other people in the agency, what would this look like if we did some sort of adjustment on how much we did of what? And is every test that we require right now in the I-502 suite, is it absolutely necessary? Because I think, I just have to wonder, is there any place that we can kind of move these around to make some adjustment in cost so that processors and producers aren't getting, they're not being impacted, nor are labs really, if we can move things around a little bit. Is that possible? So that's question number one. Question number two is one that I have now seen in response to both of our proposed rules, both the original and the supplemental CR 102 that we filed and had hearings on. And one thing I hear all the time, and it's in our written documents that are on the website, right? When we give up our comments, right? We share comments that we received, is this notion that any increase in pesticide and heavy metal testing will only enrich labs. So, and that was the more controversial thing that I wanted to bring up here, because I just wanted to kind of bring that up with people who work in labs for a little bit of response on that, because it's an interesting comment. Just wondering what your thoughts are on one or both of those questions, or neither.
I think that I can definitely see that perspective from a grower's perspective, right? That the labs want this because it's just going to be a bunch of revenue for them, and ultimately it's not going to protect public health and safety. And I think that's an important point to keep in mind, is if we want to keep public health and safety in mind, what is really required for us to make sure that people are not exposed to things that are dangerous. Given that there is no research about smoking pesticide-laden cannabis, there really is no data. We know that myclobutanol, for instance, gives off cyanide gas, but to my knowledge, no one has ever actually measured that in cannabis smoke, cannabis vapor, any of that, right? Is the cyanide levels that are in there going to hurt us? I don't know. I mean, I've done back of the envelope calculations, and not to my knowledge, even if there was, a failing level of myclobutanol in there. But that's, again, we don't have any data. We have been involved, Medicine Creek being we, in looking at heavy metals in cannabis vaporizer cartridges. It's pretty clear that if you test the oil for heavy metals, and just the big four, you're not going to be protecting consumers from inhaling the metals that are in the heating elements themselves.
Right.
So I think that requiring heavy metals and pesticide of every single lot that gets sold is probably a bit of overkill. So where is that balance of random sampling from shelves, for instance, or, you know, every 10th lot, or, you know, like, I don't know what the right answer is there. And so we do have data on people ingesting heavy metals, like that data is worked out. To my knowledge, edibles is a small percentage of what gets sold in retail stores. So maybe we start there because we have actual data about people being exposed to heavy metals, you know, through oral routes of consumption. And also pesticides, right? We have some evidence-based data for that, oral routes of consumption. You know, I don't necessarily, and I think we can also look at some of the data that the labs have already generated in regards to pesticide testing. It's not a perfect sampling because most of the pesticide testing that we get as labs are voluntary. So maybe the people who are spraying pesticides obviously sending their samples in for testing. But I think, you know, there's enough data out there to suggest there is certain amounts of failing product out there. But again, are those levels set at a reasonable amount? Is that a level that I would be worried about inhaling? I don't really have a good answer for that. And I wish I did. So I'm not really answering the question in a great way, but I do think it's an important point to keep in mind that probably requiring these expensive tests of every single lot not actually going to prevent dangerous product from getting out there. So there could be creative ways to reduce some of that, I think, for sure.
I appreciate that perspective. Do others want to?
Yeah, I mean, I think, I mean, I agree with Amber, you know, and but I think it gets very complicated once you start saying, okay, we're going to test every 5 pounds on this, but on this, it's every 20 pounds and whatever. Like, how do you keep track of all those samples? And does it provide opportunity for, you know, somebody that's trying to hide something to say, okay, well, these 3 I'm not going to test, this one I'll test. And, you know, like, I don't, you know, I feel like might open up some more avenues to hide things. You know, with things like concentrates, it's like as far as I know, a batch is supposed to be one run something, right? Whatever that is, kind of ambiguous definition, one lot. You know, so I mean, what's the difference, right? It's like one lot, you do the test or you don't, you know. So I think it just would be hard to track all those things. Once again, I don't have a great answer either, and I'm not trying to knock down what Amber said or at all. Or this is not but you know, one thing I thought of, which I have no idea if it would be reasonable, is maybe you have some sort of just like we have the 3 tiers of producers, maybe the testing level is somehow set to that, like what tier you're at, like what percentage of your lots get tested, or what tests are required. You know, I don't know, like just to try to adjust it, because it's definitely the smaller farmers that at least initially is going to take the biggest hit, right? If prices don't adjust to cover the sampling costs, it's a little farmer for sure. So I don't know if there's some way that it could be scaled that way or not. You know, I don't know.
That's okay. It's deliberative dialogues, and we're all, every answer is good. Every answer is good. So,
hey, for the first time, yay. Yeah.
Others, Jeff, Tanya, anything to add there?
Well, I think as far as, you know, increasing testing is only enriching the labs. I think we've already talked about that. The prices are still really low, and with all the changes coming down the pipeline as ecology takes over, Jeff hit on a couple of them, but, you know, before we would run, you know, maybe it's 50 samples, and of those 50 samples, we'd run, you know, 5 or 6 controls. But now they're talking about for every 20 samples, we're going to have to run on the order 8 to 10 controls. So, you know, a third of our batches are now going to be controls. So even without heavy metals and pesticides, just the new way the lab testing is being structured is going to add a significant cost to the testing. So again, I don't have all the answers, just throwing some key points out there that, yeah, it sounds like, oh, the labs are going to be happy with all this. They're going to mandate all this testing. Well, yes, it's going to increase cost just in itself, and then restructuring the accreditation is going to add even more to that overhead for the lab.
Right.
Okay. So first off, I'll touch on your question about unneeded testing or more directed testing, and I'll start off by saying I am not a public health and safety expert. I'm a first responder, but this is way above my head in terms of public policy. But I don't see any mycotoxin failures ever. It seems to me that replacing total yeast and mold, which seemed like an overly broad category for testing, with this super narrow mycotoxins category might not have been the best. And again, I only say that from the perspective that we just never see failures. I think that maybe just doing mycotoxin testing on ingestible the edibles might make a little bit more sense because some of the data suggests that that's the route where it's dangerous. Again, though, I'm not a public health and safety expert, so like Amber said, I don't know what a safe level of pesticides is. We had members of the audience last time talking about this too. Show me the data suggesting that any level of, for lack of a better one, myclobutanol, right? Show me the evidence that that's going to be dangerous inhaling, and I don't have it. And so, it maybe there's some room for some studies. I know those are super expensive. Maybe the state can take over some kind of bringing in some consultants and talking about that. I don't think that's within the purview of the labs necessarily, though. You tell me what you want me to test and I can figure out how to test it. I can't really tell you what the proper thing that we should be testing for is. So that's the first question. In terms of the labs enriching themselves, I would argue that we're not the ones calling for pesticides in heavy metal testing. The biggest voice in my mind would be the medical community, who don't trust the system, the people who have walked away from I-502 and are now in the black markets because they don't trust the labs, they don't trust the LCB. I definitely, like Amber said, I can see why somebody would think that me advocating for, not raising lot sizes would be me trying to enrich myself. But I've intentionally avoided any kind of economic arguments specifically for that reason. These types of rules are going to potentially put labs out of business as well. It's not just the farmers that are at risk here. Heavy metals, for example, part of the ecology transition, we've decided that we're going to require ICP-MS or ICP-OES in order to do heavy metals testing. Correct me if I'm wrong, Amber, but that's a $250,000 piece of equipment. Not all labs are going to be required to do that testing, but if we want to be competitive in that market, then we're going to have to fork over a whole bunch of money. And not every lab's going to be able to do that. Similarly, you half the number of samples that a lab's going to be able to run, we're going to have to hire more staff. We're going to have to buy more equipment, even just for cannabinoids. And the cannabinoid equipment's a lot less expensive, but that's still capital that we're going to have to generate. And again, I come back to this point that we're cheap. We're so dang cheap right now, and we do it because we have to be competitive. The farmers expect it. And again, I keep coming back to the tax structure. And at least from my perspective, and for lack of a better words, this tax is just bleeding these guys dry. So yeah, in terms of enriching the labs, I don't think that argument holds water. We're struggling to survive just as much as any of the farmers that I have as customers.
I think if any of us wanted to get rich, this is not a business we would be working in.
Yeah, you don't get into science to get rich. I don't think, not this kind anyway. But no, I do want to address the enriching ourselves comment as well. Yeah, I mean, like everybody's saying, it's very cheap. I mean, we're all businesses, right? We're in it to, pay salaries and, hopefully get a little extra money to whatever, buy new equipment someday or that kind of thing. But we just got the ball over the line for pesticide certification just last week. And we did it during the pandemic, and it took us forever because we couldn't get any help from anybody, right? Nobody could come to our lab and all that kind of stuff. And we have laid out a lot of money to get there, right? I mean, it's expensive to buy the machine, all the labor, all the hours, all the validation.
And you have yet to bring in any revenue yet on that.
And have not, no, we have not brought in a single penny of revenue, and it's going to take a lot of time before we even come close to paying off, that machine, let alone the labor that we put in there. And, so it's not, there's profit margin, quote unquote profit margins, right? Like whatever we make above and beyond what the actual cost of that sample is, are really small. And we have to keep them, because of, the market just won't bear. Not even just the competition between the labs, but just like, getting farmers to use us or whatever, like you can only go so high because they can't afford it. We have plenty of customers that you just wonder, are they ever going to pay you? Because they're in a situation sometimes where they don't have the money up front to pay for testing, right? They have to harvest, get the test, sell it, then they can pay you, right? You got to say, well, how much do I trust this guy before I say, oh, And so, I mean, we're not charging that much, and we're not. I don't see anybody getting super rich off of it. That's for sure.
Thank you.
It's not nonprofit. I'm not going to say that.
I mean, to tag on to James, Jay, you
can call me Jay.
Sorry.
I've been calling you Jim. I am so sorry.
That's okay.
I've been paying a PhD chemist to work on pesticides for about a year now, and we're still working on validating techniques. And we're getting close, but I'm not there yet. I can't recognize any kind of return on my investment yet until I get that accreditation coming by, and I'm still not there yet. So, I mean, that's a PhD chemist wage, and that's not even including the equipment that we've had to put out for. So it's very expensive to do this stuff. And again, as I keep coming back to, it's only going to get more expensive with added rigor.
Okay. Well, thanks very much for that follow-up. Tanya, anything else that you wanted to offer?
I mean, I think we've all said it. I mean, to kind of just another example, we brought up heavy metals in our lab during a pandemic, right? So it's kind of the same type of thing. We bring in expensive equipment. We have to be very careful in scheduling any kind of service or support and things of that nature. So, yeah, I think everyone's covered everything pretty well.
Okay.
Yeah, I just want to throw one anecdote in that we have during setup trying to figure out the mass spec and all that, and we finally scheduled somebody to come out to work with us, and then they got COVID. The tech got COVID right before they came, right? So that was gone. Then we were down for like another, it was like another 2 months before we could even reschedule it, So anyway, it was just a little anecdote. Pandemic life.
Yeah, the adjustments we are having to make and continue. I mean, it's been a year now almost, right? Where we've been trying to adjust to this new way of interacting with each other and doing business. And yeah, it's challenging at best. Okay. We only have 25 minutes left and one more question. And I am interested in hearing about this from your perspectives. What is the most common question or concern raised by your clients? And I think if you have more than one, feel free to share. But what are the concerns that you folks hear from the people who you do business with?
Where's my data?
I think our number one concern is when they get a failing result for anything and they can't figure out what it, where it came from. And then I don't remember what question this came up with, but someone brought it up on one of the other questions that if they get a pesticide failure or something like that, and they're saying, well, we don't use any pesticides, where could it come from? And they're really looking to us a lot. We've actually troubleshot people's facilities with them, just perhaps we had a good relationship and things of that nature. But that's probably the number one. Why did my sample fail?
Okay.
So I'll jump in there, and this is my shortest answer by far. So that's good, right? The most and it's funny because you guys kind of touched on this already, but the most common question we get is, can you rush this sample? We do get questions about failures and how to not fail tests in the future. And for this reason, we offer free site visits to help our customers figure out root causes for their issues. At this point in the industry, though, most of our customers have things pretty well figured out, so site visits are less of a thing than they used to be. And really, even in the beginning, they weren't that big of a thing. But we've definitely done some site visits. Like Tanya mentioned, we've gone out to facilities and tried to figure out root causes of why somebody's failing, for mold back in the day before mycotoxins. And we've definitely figured out some stuff. I mean, hey, that leak in your roof that has that black stuff growing around it, that might be your problem. And we go around and we do swabs and figure out, where vectors are coming, or, where things are coming from. Yeah, I think both Tanya and Amber hit on exactly what we see the most. Where's my data? Why am I failing?
Yeah, I'd say that the biggest question we probably get is where is my data exactly? Like, we got it 12 hours ago. Why isn't it done? That kind of thing. And then probably the biggest complaint we get is by far potency, and it's, and sometimes it's, whatever. That would be the biggest complaint for sure. We definitely have had, complaints about failures in the past. We've had a little bit, sometimes people complain about non-failing numbers, like why is there whatever, some propane in my sample or whatever, even though it's not even close to failing. That's pretty rare. And then micro, with micro, we do get some complaints about failures, but I'd say it's kind of half-half. Half people are saying, why did I fail? I shouldn't have failed. And the other half are help me find out why I'm failing. It's kind of I'd say it's a pretty even mix on that. But
so when people ask for help, typically what it is, do you try to respond? To me, that kind of seems outside the scope of what
like Jeff said,
labs do.
Yeah, just like Jeff said, we do the same thing. We'll go to their place and sample. If it's like a micro type failure, we'll just give them swab. Excuse me, we'll give them swabs and have them do, and we'll analyze them for it, to see and try to help them troubleshoot. We've had some problems with some residual solvent failures, like things like xylene or something showing up that shouldn't be there, and we've helped troubleshoot their chemicals. Just to be like, hey, send us your reagent, what you're using individually, try to find the source of contamination. So yeah, we help.
One step that we've taken is, in particular with something like a solvents failure, or, really any failure or any kind of, hey, we don't believe you type of comments. Okay, well, here, we'll just send it to another lab for you. So, a lot, and we generally end up paying for those as well. But, I know I've sent a ton of samples to Amber. just for confirmation. And most of the time they come back and they're pretty dang similar to what we gave the customer. And that generally seems to help with, any kind of, hey, you guys don't know what you're talking about type of questions. But yeah, I mean, in terms of site visits, and helping people with their problem, you want your customers to be successful, right? If if my client goes out of business, then I do too. So, anything that we can do to help these guys really is important in my mind because their health is my health.
That's
Yeah,
great.
I actually
Thanks,
kind of,
Josh.
I enjoy helping troubleshoot ththese problems sometimes with them. It's something different to do, and it's some good investigative science. So I get some pleasure out of it too.
That's good to hear.
I would say one other. We also do get our second number complaint is cost. Just to going back to that previous one,
Cost?
we get a lot of complaints about cost, especially from those smaller farms. Like if you're not getting, we were trying to explain to somebody that they're not even breaking even on their if their lots are so small that they're not even breaking even on the testing. Just the way things are. But so yeah, we definitely get complaints about cost.
Okay. And those complaints, you say, your understanding is, I guess, is a better way to say it. It comes primarily from smaller farms, like your ones, maybe.
It seems to be, yeah. I mean, not universally, but
I would say I've gotten, I don't know what the right term is, try to strong arm maybe by larger companies more often for price cuts, promising to send hundreds of samples if you give us XYZ pricing. And rarely do I ever see those samples.
Okay.
My general response to people in that regard is show us the numbers. I'm happy to give you a discount once you demonstrate that you're a reliable customer.
Yeah.
But I'm not going to create a special pricing scheme for someone on the promise that you're going to send us samples so you can get a couple cheap tests.
So it's kind of like
So
requesting
yeah,
a
I mean,
volume discount. Yeah,
yeah,
go
the
ahead.
pricing is definitely a common question we get. I don't know if it's a complaint, can you help us out on the price here, whatever. But in my experience, it's been a lot of trying to get strong armed a little bit by people promising to send many samples. And we don't really do a lot of special pricing here. End of story. We try to keep it really simple because as soon as, it gets very complicated for invoicing. So,
Sure.
I try to keep it very straightforward across the board. And that way I don't have to do any negotiating. This is the price. This is how much it costs us to run the test. Take it or leave it. I want to be, I want to try to help people out. And, we have rarely, and on rare occasions, given people special pricing schemes for certain projects or volumes or whatever. But volume discounts also don't help the smaller farmers. They just can't bring in the volume that larger processors can. So it's also another ding against small farmers if you constantly give volume discounts. So it's another reason why I just try to keep our pricing straight across the board no matter what.
Okay.
I consider myself very fortunate that I have a partner. My business partner handles the people side of things, and I just get to handle the science. So, we talk about this a lot, though, and he definitely gets a lot of the same arguments that Amber. I mean, I can't count the number of times that we're going to expect all these samples from somebody who we just gave a price break to up front, and then they go somewhere else, and you never hear from them. They never pay you for the samples in the first place. And there's definitely the large farmers putting pressure on you in terms of, hey, we can, pay your bills for the month if we do one drop. But then there's also the sad stories that you hear of farmers that have to sell their lot. And if they don't get good numbers on this lot, then they're going to go out of business type of a thing. I mean, both of those stories happen constantly. And so cost is definitely, it's a huge thing. And, I hate to say this, but we end up just eating so much. I mean, we end up doing free retests all the time. We end up doing those site visits for free, you know, just to help keep our customers in business, so that maybe if we scratch their back, then in the future they can scratch ours. But a lot of times that doesn't really work. There's not a lot of loyalty necessarily. I've seen.
Okay. Thanks for that. Anything else?
I think one thing that comes up for us is just the way some samples are categorized in leaf. And so then it comes to us and it's categorized wrong, and so the wrong tests are ordered. So that's a big one, and we try to catch it, but apparently leaf isn't the friendliest of displaying all the tests where they should be. I think one of the most common ones is ethanol extractions, and they'll choose food grade solvent, which is really more for oils and things of that nature. And so they choose food grade solvent, and then they get a mycotoxin test or microbial test. When, if ethanol doesn't kill microbes, we've all been doing something wrong the last year with our hand sanitizer. So it's some of those things, some of the categories in leaf are unclear.
Okay. Thank you. I think I've heard that before, but thanks for raising that here. And some of the things that you shared here are things we've heard from others as well, but it's good to hear that coming straight from the labs. I mean, I think sometimes I get that information secondhand, so it's good to hear it from you directly. So thanks for that.
We also talked about that particular instance in question 3 with how we guide our customers as labs to meet the WAC in terms of the testing requirements.
Yeah. So that's good. And I do remember the discussion around, providing the offsite visits at no cost, which, okay.
Which, just to quickly add on, that goes to reinforce this concept that we're not here to make ourselves rich. If we were, we'd be charging for every little thing, and there'd be no negotiation, no volume discounts, none of that stuff. I mean, they've really got this backwards, where we're bending over backwards to try to help people with this stuff. And it's not about getting rich. If I wanted to get rich, I know that there's a pretty clear pathway for that. If I didn't have morals, then I'd be a millionaire right now, very easily.
Well, yeah, and kind of on that note too, I just wanted to say that but I think a couple people have brought up, a lot of times when our clients don't believe us, we end up retesting it and we eat that cost. So, I mean, right there, we've done 2 tests for the price of 1, really.
Don't forget the half-hour phone call you had to hear their story about how we were wrong.
Exactly.
I mean, it's a bit of a jest that I say that, but in reality, we all experience this, right? It's not just the second test for free. It's the call, the email, the follow-up, the explanation on top of that second free test. I think it's when Jeff, when you say it takes you 10 minutes to run a sample, that is just the injection part, right? There's prep, there's talking to your tech to make sure they pull that sample again. It's re-prepping it again. It's running it again. It's comparing the second number you got to the first number you got, and then talking to the client about it. There's a lot of individual steps along the way there that are not part of your standard workflow that are involved in just retesting something.
You're absolutely right. That 10 minutes, I'm talking just machine time. That's it. And, to even add on, there's opportunity losses here where if I'm doing a retest, then that retest is tying up the machine for where I could be running an actual sample in that time slot. And that is exacerbated then if we go to a 25-minute runtime instead of a 10-minute runtime. Now, all of a sudden, those retests become a lot more expensive for me.
Yeah, that's true. And yeah, and also with all the other things you talk about in the just the retest thing, often there's a a conversation just like with me and the analyst and whatever, like really like why, what happened? Is this real? All that kind of stuff too. And there's that time as well. So
Yeah, that's a great point. Every time, a complaint comes in, we're not only logging that and keeping track of it, but we're starting investigations based off of those complaints. You have to introspect every single time anybody oh man, is my QA data good? Now you have to go back and verify that everything was good for that sample and nothing got messed up. We're checking it anyways, but hey, did we miss something here? And yeah, you're absolutely right. It's time. Time.
So coming back to the lab to ask for that follow-up or challenge the results it sounds like it can be pretty complicated and time-consuming, and not just as simple as saying, hey, retest this again. It's a lot more to it than that.
Yep.
All right. Go ahead. Somebody going to say something? I feel like I have just interrupted someone. Okay. Sorry about that. All right, we have 9 minutes left, and hoping we can conclude on time. But just wanted to open it up for any final thoughts, anything beyond these questions that you'd like to share with as a supplement to the first deliberative dialogue, or just in general. Wanted to give a few minutes for that before we close. So anything else, I guess.
I mean, yes, but but not off the top of my head. No, I think we've covered a lot of ground here, and of course, there's more. We've only brushed the surface with all this stuff, and I think I don't know about the rest of the panelists here, but continuing this conversation, maybe brainstorming, coming up with additional questions, and then having additional sessions. I'd be perfectly interested in that. I don't know about others. I know it takes a lot of time. But again, I don't think we've really covered, and there's so much more that we could talk about.
Absolutely.
yeah, I mean, I agree that there's a lot more we could talk about, and I would certainly be happy to do it again in the future. But yeah, I mean, I think we did cover a lot of good ground, and I know we're giving you guys a lot to think about, and I certainly appreciate the opportunity, for this new way of trying to talk about these issues. So I think it was a great idea.
Well, good. I'm glad that you found value in it. I know I certainly did, and really appreciated. I appreciated all the panels very much, because I think this was designed to sort of begin to unsurface, I guess, and flush out some of the things that we think about that we don't necessarily bring to listen and learn sessions, because those are so concentrated on here's a set of draft conceptual rules, and really this is what we're thinking about here. And I think with the quality control rules and we had to follow up, listen and learn, that was more about if we go forward with this, what would mitigation look like? So that was around cost reduction. That's where we came up with that phase-in plan initially, to try to just bring pesticides and heavy metals in an incremental way. And I think those were good conversations. I think people were starting to kind of have these ideas about what we could do. And I think life just got busy for everyone, and we didn't have a follow-up to that listen and learn session. But I think just some of what I've heard in these deliberative dialogue sessions really can inform what we do in terms of rule and policy development in the future, for sure. But I also think it's really important to bring the consumers, processors, and producers and labs together to talk through these things, because I don't know that we've ever done this before in this way. So I think it's opened the door to a lot more discussion in the future, and I think it's also proven that we can do that, and we can be good to each other while we do that. So yes, we want to continue to have these, and then there's a few other engagement models that I want to bring to rules work and policy development in the future that will engage even more people and really not be based so much around a specific topic. And I think this was largely around quality control, but I think there are general topics that we can bring to the forum and really get some good thinking from the entire community. Really with the regulators, they're just as a facilitator. So I think there's a lot of room for us to do good work there too. Okay. So once again, I know the last time we closed, I was in a dark house and not able to join you. So I'd like to thank Mother Nature for not being so mean this time around. But thank you for the gift of your time today and in the last panel. I know you are busy people with lots of things going on, but your thoughts and perspectives are really meaningful to the agency and certainly to me personally. So I appreciate all the time you've shared with us to make this successful. So next steps for me at this point is to get this recording up on our outward-facing website. So I don't know if you've noticed, I don't think I wanted to wait until we had all the dialogues uploaded on our outward-facing website, but they are there, and now this one will join the kind of collection of deliberative dialogues we've had to this point. And then the agency is going to start redrafting the quality control rules based on what we learned in these deliberative dialogue sessions, and also kind of some forward thinking about what LEAF might look like, or in the alternative, what life might look like without LEAF in the future. So we want to, do some sort of out of the box thinking on that, and in terms of following through with the quality control rules. There's this window of time that we need to file a supplemental CR 102. And everybody knows what that is, right? Before I just assume that you know what that is. So it's the rule proposal, right? There's a window of time that we need to file that. Otherwise, the original supplemental CR 102 expires. However, we still have the CR 101 in place that keeps the rulemaking open. So there's some additional work that we need to do in terms of developing a new proposal, right? And then doing the kind of economic analysis that we're required to do under the Regulatory Fairness Act. At this point, that supplemental CR 102 is scheduled to expire mid-April. And I think it's being a little overly optimistic that we'll have all that work done by mid-April. I mean, in all honesty, doing another small business economic impact statement is quite a bit of work, and we need to contract with an economist to do that work since we don't have one on staff. So I would assume early, I want to say June, July for a new 102, since we wouldn't be supplementing anything at this point. So stay tuned for that work, and I will reach out to all of you as we move towards developing that new proposal for your feedback. And then I think of course, we're going to do listen and learn sessions around any new proposal, or even in concept, just like we did with this original rule set moving forward. So any questions on process on that? I know navigating the Administrative Procedures Act is not everybody's cup of tea, and I appreciate that. I've been doing it a long time, so I just have to remember not everybody.
We've had some crash courses in it lately.
There you go. Well, and I think actually we're preparing to do like a video series that, about how that all works, that we're going to put up on our outward facing webpage as well. So it'll be there as a resource for folks moving into the future. So I kind of like to call it rulemaking revealed, but we'll see. We'll see if I win on that. Maybe not. All right. Well, anything else before we close for today? All right. Well, thanks again to all of you for your great contributions to this process and your really meaningful feedback and thoughts about moving these things forward. It's greatly appreciated, and I very much look forward to working with you all in the future.
Yeah, thanks for asking us.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
Take
And
good
good
care,
luck.
everyone.
Thanks, Kathy. Like I've said in the past, personally, I don't envy you at all in this.
I just turned the recording off, by the way. Yeah. Jeff, that is a common sentiment of folks, and I guess that's why so I'm not necessarily doing the rules for cannabis anymore. I'm managing the rules program for LCB, right? But I still am very involved in the cannabis just rules in general, just because, it's hard to bring a rules coordinator into this work that has not, done cannabis rules before. And by virtue of it being so new in terms of statutory and regulatory construction, yeah, it's multidimensional, and like you guys have noticed, LCB is not a scientific agency, and there's this whole part of cannabis regulation that is very scientific. So I'm not sure that the folks who put together I-502 were necessarily thinking about